And thank you for staying with us. We are glad that you've stuck with us all through since 7 a.m. If you're just joining, well, you are on time for the second conversation of the day. The first guest who I was talking to, it was about investment between diaspora and Kenya. Then we had a small banter with Cheryl from Power Talk, and now we are on to the last conversation where we're talking about zero hunger, how to to eliminate the problem of hunger. And this is SDG number 2. And for this particular discussion, I'm joined by two gentlemen who are champions in this area. So I have Elijah Bakari, who's the head of research at Policy Action Initiative. He's at by the far left of the screen, yes. And just next to him is Brian Kithinji, who's the executive director of Policy Action Initiative. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. So let me start with you, Brian, telling us what you do at Policy Action Initiative and how it's in line with eliminating hunger.
Yes, so thank you very much for inviting us to the show. As you said, my name is Brian Kithinji. I currently work as Executive Director of Policy Action Initiative. And Policy Action Initiative was a brilliant idea that we came up with, and we formed an organization to basically do three things: to champion research, to do policy analysis, and to also do capacity building on existing policies. And specifically, we work around the core thematic area of environmental conservation, because we do understand that when you look around today, everybody is doing capacity building awareness programs, but are they underpinned through research? We also do understand that people are doing tree planting activities, there's also aquaculture going on, agroforestry, all these projects, and they are very brilliant, and we actually advocate for more of them. But the question is, are they underpinned by research? Do you know the soil quality? Do you know the groundwater that is existing in that area? Do you know the sustainability effects or the possibility of higher production if you use some other techniques? So that's basically what our organization does, and also advocating now using this research to advocate for better policies at the national level, because we do understand that everything starts from the government. Government action is important if you want to achieve any of those SDGs, any of all this agenda that as young people we have, but we don't have many young people represented in the policy making processes. So that is basically what Policy Action Initiative does.
Right. Wow, that's a brilliant thing. And, speaking of young people doing policy, and that's what you're representing here today. To you, Elijah, as the head of research at Policy Action Network, tell us about the research around, hunger. What is the cause of hunger? Because recently we had the issue of food insecurity. People are dying of hunger, especially in sides of Turkana and all that. And even in these sides, there was shortage of some food, because of the drought, the dry season that was there. So what is the problem?
What are the problems?
Okay,
is a better question, because there are several of them. But I feel like even as I come into answering that question, there are a few definitions I must just put there. Of course, for us to have zero hunger, one thing we would need is total food security. And I would say we have total food security when we have this case. All people at all times can access adequate amounts of food, right, for their dietary needs. This food has to be safe, this food has to be nutritious, this food has to be accessible and allow them to be able to live a healthy and active lifestyle. Unless this is happening, you cannot say that we have food security. That's the first thing we need to realize. Okay, so food security has to have all this. So what are some of the causes? Now, if I come within the Kenyan context, let me limit myself to Kenya for this discussion, because if I go into global discussions, there's a lot of data. There are many other factors I need to come in. I need to look through so much, so many numbers and so much data and so many other factors. But let me first limit myself to Kenya, because this is a context many of us will be familiar with. Just for the record, in this country, about 20%, only 20% of the land is actually arable. Like about 20% of the land is what we can actually grow food, is fit for agriculture. Which would of course go on to explain to you why we do import a lot of food from Uganda and Tanzania. We actually are fed significantly by our neighbors, but even with all that, we are still food insecure. I'm tempted to tell you we make matters worse by actually turning our arable lands into concrete jungles. We actually build on our arable land.
The small percentage we
Yes,
have here
yes,
is still destroying it.
But then when it comes to, again, food security, what are some of the problems? Another thing I must put forth is poverty is an issue. Our food distribution systems are an issue. Previously, we've had situations where some people were pouring milk in one area, while in another place, there was a shortage of milk. We've had places where people are throwing away their potatoes and cabbages, and somewhere else, people cannot access food in that way. So you have situations where people have the money, they want to buy the food, but the food is not getting there. So already our food distribution systems are a problem. Then there is this attitude that exists amongst, say, our young people, especially around agriculture. We don't see agriculture as, you know, this is the way to go. A number of us still think agriculture is for poor old people, and this is really again affecting how we are able to, you know, do our agriculture. So of course, poverty is an issue. I'd say knowledge is also an issue, and all this is causing hunger. Climate change is definitely an issue, and what makes it worse is the fact that we have not come to a place and put our policies and all that help us to, you know, deal with these things. And the technology is also missing when it comes to our food systems, in the sense of most of our agriculture is rain-fed. We depend on rain-fed agriculture. So if the rains don't come, the crops will fail, which is, you know, tells us a lot about ourselves and how we have a problem, because we have rivers in this country. Now, let me make matters worse. Within these universities, we have trained people on agriculture. We've trained people on how to farm in arid and semi-arid lands. We've even taken students from Kenya to places as far as Israel, some of our best students, to learn how to farm in the desert. Kenya is not a desert.
Imagine.
So if these people know how to farm in Israel, they shouldn't have a problem farming in Kenya. So what becomes the gap right there? The policies that are required to ensure that we are absorbing these people into our systems, into agricultural systems, as consultants, as scientists and all that, so we can just make this country food secure. If Israel can be food secure,
then
trust
definitely
me, Kenya has a better
chance.
Kenya is better placed.
Yeah.
To mention but a few things.
Okay, I mean, that's a lot. And I honestly didn't know that we only have 20% of arable land, because I thought, you know, Kenya's like 80% arable land.
This is where I'm tempted to tell you, maybe 80% of where most Kenyans live, because most of us live actually south of the equator, a little bit in the lake region, but most of our north is sparsely populated and also arid and semi-arid.
Okay, all right. Now, back to policy. And he has spoken about policy, you know, people going to Israel to learn, but now the problem of implementing is the policies that, you know, in place or not in place. So how do you get to, or how can we get the government to, you know, adapt some of this good policies that we need to make our agriculture work and to at least promote food security?
Yeah, you know, first you have to understand that food security is a multi-sectoral approach. It is not something only limited to agriculture, and I think that's one mistake that we often make when you talk about food insecurity in this country and achieving SDG2 on zero hunger. So when you look, as Elijah has explained very well, that most of our land is not arable. But then when you look at it, our agriculture itself, in the 20% of the land that is arable, is structured for cash crops. Since the British came here, we turned all our lands, okay, they turned, not us ourselves, through our own volition, they turned our lands into cultivating mainly coffee, pyrethrum, tea. These products, where do they serve? The markets in the UK, the markets in Europe. They do not serve us. Our largest export today is horticultural products. Where do they go? They go to serve European markets. So our agriculture is centered not to produce for our own country. And that is why when you look at the three main foods that we eat in Kenya, which is maize, beans, and wheat products, we do not produce any of those. Like, we have an insufficiency of maize. We only produce 3.6 million tons of maize every year, but we still have to import 2.4 million tons in order for us to meet the deficits that we have. Wheat is solely, we import it. Soya, we also import a lot of beans. I don't know whether many people realize that, but we also import beans. So when you look at all our food crops, we import them. And when we import them, it means that the prices will be high. And when you go back to the definition of how the Food and Agricultural Organization defines food insecurity, is that it has to be physical, social, and economic access. So economic is very important. So if there is food but people cannot buy it, then there is food insecurity. And we know that in our country, we have Article 43(1)(c) of the Constitution, which guarantees that the right to food for every Kenyan. But the government has always said, and in their Food and National Security policy, they have always said achieving this means that we also have to implement Article 46 of the Constitution on the right to consumer protection, meaning that the importers of food, the brokers, do not have their right to set whatever prices they have. So when we talk about policy, we need to streamline that article of the Constitution. Another area is about we have to change the attitude of Kenyans. Going back to how agriculture is structured. So when you look at an area in Baringo, for example, because this is something that we studied and we know about it. In Baringo, before the Pakera irrigation scheme was constructed there, they used to plant a lot of sorghum and millet. And these are indigenous crops that have grown in Baringo for thousands of years. But now they switched to planting what? Onions, capsicums. So naturally, the people of Baringo today are facing food insecurity. But if they went back to their traditional forms of culture, then they solve that. The other issue is about about attitudes when it comes to things like baby formulas. And that's where we critique the government, because the government has actually been advocating against people, Kenyans, using baby formula. But we do understand that child nutrition in Kenya, according to the UNICEF, the last year, 26% of children in Kenya are stunted. And one of the main foods that children need is milk. And we know that because of so many factors, milk is not easily accessible to children from breastfeeding mothers, and using baby formula, if the government came and even subsidized that, like the way they subsidize other products in this country, then it avails milk to these children and it deals with the issue about child nutrition. So when you look at it comprehensively, as I said earlier, that is a multi-sectoral approach. There are so many things in policy that the government can do, but also the county governments, because this is not only a national problem, but also at the county level, in order to increase upscale youth involvement in agriculture, but also change the attitudes with regards to food production in this country.
Okay, so have you had platforms where you have discussed this with the government, shared your thoughts with the government, and if yes, then what has been the response? Let me just continue from there before I go to Elijah.
Yes, and that's where we come in, policy action. We put the action in policy. So 2 weeks ago, we held an inter-university debate where we brought together 30 universities and 200 students to discuss and to give ideas about how they feel on different thematic concepts on food insecurity and child nutrition in Kenya. And all the deliberations are going to be presented to the main actors in future. But also aside from that, last year we drafted around 10 policy papers on these topics, and not just food insecurity, because as Elijah said, that food insecurity is also linked to climate change. So when we did a paper on climate mobility for KIPRA, the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research Association, like the government's think tank, what we focused mainly is that for us to provide a suitable intervention to climate mobility, we will need to address the issue of planting indigenous crops, especially in communities that are most affected by drought, meaning that the communities that live above the equator, in the rest of the country that is not arable. But aside also from that, we've also been doing low-level research, collecting data about university students, how many of them have access to a balanced diet, because when you talk about food insecurity, we always forget that people even living in urban areas actually face that challenge a lot, because remember that the prices of food, the prices of fruits, for example, it's very high. For a comrade who's studying in Kenyatta University, for him to buy either chapati or to buy strawberries, it's not a choice. It's not an easy choice, which I'm going to make. So we collected, exactly, it's a luxury. You can't just go and purchase it. So we collected a little bit of data in the lead up to the debate, and we shared it with the Kenya National Farmers Federation, who are one of our partners, in order for them to see, because they have the capacity and the manpower to increase the agriculture and also to lobby the government for action. Because we may try as much as we can as young people, but we know that partnerships is the way to go if you want to force the government, because I always say the government is like a trailer. It just can't change. It can't just stand easily. You have to push, lobby, have it as a multi-sectoral approach, bring together more people, and then you can get the action that you want. Okay,
so hopefully action, it's on the way. It's something that's there. Back to you, Elijah. We have spoken about, the issue of food security being affected by different things, and you've mentioned climate a lot. So let me go into climate, and I know some of the solutions that are being given with the problem of climate change. There's one that affected the agricultural sector, and it had to do with meat. we're being told that we'll need to stop eating meat for some reason. Does that also you know, I think it affects, you know, the food security, because now we're talking about balanced diet. Meat also is part of our meal. So if we lose that, does it affect now food security?
So a number of things would come in order to answer this question, and it would depend a lot on culture and a number of other things. So when it comes to, we depend on meat specifically for protein. I'm randomly remembering right now that one of the things that Gen Z is facing is actually they're occurring in a world where there is less supply of meat. Some time back, I think 2 generations ago, there was a problem of generally lack of food. There was just inadequate food. But right now, one of the biggest problems is actually less meat is available, which is interesting. I could give a whole lecture about that. But let me answer your question.
Okay.
Yes, so of course we depend on meat specifically as a source of protein. On whether if we cut down our production of meat, whether it will affect food security or not, this would depend on a number of things. Remember, first of all, I said during when we are mentioning food security, you need physical, social, and economic access to this food. So you need to be able to buy it. So, some of the things I'm really going to highlight again, it needs to be adequate and available. I need to have an economic capacity to make those purchases. Now, in this case, even if I have economic capacity to purchase meat, but the meat is not there, then there is definitely not food security. But that would not necessarily be a problem if you're not a meat-consuming culture, because there are other sources of protein. And now this is where convincing Kenyans becomes interesting or tricky, because then we would need to convince Kenyans perhaps to, I know telling people to go vegan becomes hard because there are vegetarian sources of protein. But besides that, there are alternative sources of protein like insects. There are a number of insects that can be eaten for protein. You might know of termites, you might know of crickets, you might know of all that. So all these are available sources. But then within our culture, I don't know how many of us would be willing to eat insects. Now, again, I would also say a number of food scientists have also worked on research around that, and realized that one of the reasons why people don't want to eat insects is a yuck factor. Like people just like, this is disgusting and all. So innovations have come up in the same area. People are creating things like cricket cookies. So this is just a cookie, but you know, it's highly rich in protein because it has the, should I say, cricket powder or whatever insect powder in. So it's very rich in protein. To you, it's just a cookie. There's no yuck factor. Very rich in protein and all that. So on whether the issue of meat will be a problem to food security, I suspect within Kenyan culture, yes. Because we are not willing to diversify our sources of protein. Yes, because it is true. Talking about climate, specifically beef. Beef has a negative effect on the environment, specifically given the methods we currently use to farm beef. But then again, when we look at cost implications, the methods we currently employ are the cheapest. They're not the best for the environment, but the cheapest. If we want to use methods that would be good for the environment, again, we'd still have a food security issues because suddenly the meat would be too expensive. So there are all these trade-offs every time you're making a decision. Yes.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. I know we're pressed for time, almost finishing. Maybe we'll have this discussion next time. But I want you to also just speak on the issue of food wastage, because there's also that is also an issue that's participating to hunger. So how do we deal with that? How do we, you know, what's your take on that? Let me ask you, Brian, and then you can also give your comments on it.
Yeah, food wastage, you can look at it in 3 ways. First of all is the issue about the produce that is in the farm that is not being used. Because, for example, when you have situations like there was a time in Lamu where people were throwing away mangoes because they have a surplus of produce, but no one is coming to purchase them. So that is food wastage, because that is food that could have been used to feed other areas. Even if, I don't know whether there's any community in Kenya which doesn't eat mangoes or wouldn't want to have mango juice. That is a fact, everybody would want to have it. So we had that problem, and yet we import mangoes from South Africa every year. So you wonder, like, can't you just go and get them there instead of taking them from Durban through the port of Durban to the port of Mombasa? There's also the issue, as now when we talk about food wastage, you always think about it in terms of people having a lot of, like, throwing away food which they do not eat. And when you look at it, it's always a problem, and sorry to say it, it's a problem with the hospitality industry, but also aside from the hospitality industry, it's also a problem with the top 10% of our population who have over 40% of our national income. That's a smart way of saying the elites of this country.
Yes, you said it.
So it's a real problem there, because what you have is that you have a situation where somebody purchases a lot of food, You go to their area, to their homes, you find so many different types of food which are placed on the table. They take some bitings and they throw away. This is food that is going to waste. But then we also have to ask ourselves, do we have the capacity to recycle the waste? I know there's a project that is being done by Kenya Utalii College, which is about taking the ugali that people leave behind and then turning it and using it to create mandazis. That's a very smart project, but it's on a small scale level. Because even if we blame the hotels for throwing away food, we have to understand that we don't have recycling of organic waste, we don't have recycling of even food waste in this country on a large scale. So that is a problem in and of itself for us to resolve that major problem. But my solution for me would be that trying to put a tax or levy a tax, especially on the hotel industry, if they do not have a system for them to recycle their food waste. So we will go to the hotels, the Hotelier Association of Kenya, and tell them, you have to have an internal food recycling system for you to deal with your food waste. So either you say that this extra food that you have, you're going to give it to communities. That's a form of recycling, to be honest, because let's not think recycling only on an industrial process, or you're going to pay a 10% tax. So this will force them, because we know that for any change to happen, you have to touch the pockets a little bit. And just one final thing about the meat. Meat, yes, climate activists say meat is a problem, but when you look at this country, meat is the only food product that we have in abundance.
True.
Because we export cattle, we export sheep to Australia, to other countries across the world. And if we consume this meat, if people stopped using soya or maize that we import from outside and started eating the beef that we have in surplus today, we solve our food insecurity problems. If we tell the communities in the northern part of Kenya that do not just see cows as a symbol of wealth, see them also as a symbol for you to solve your food insecurity, then we solve the food insecurity problem, because we know one cow has all the nutrients that you may need in your life. Thank you.
Okay, great. You know, when you talk about us importing maize, you know, some people are wondering, in the Rift Valley, thought we have maize there. People are doing maize. So what are people doing if they're not planting maize there? And in Kitale, the regions that are popular for this, or is it not in huge quantities? Is it not enough to feed the nation? Let me let you
I feel like I should first answer this question you
asked,
then I come to this one. So if first of all, let me just answer on food waste. Food waste, let me give you global, then I just come to the country. Globally, we actually estimate that the number of people who die from obesity is equal to the number of people who die from starvation. Tells you a lot about how equal distribution, or rather a better distribution of food around, how much effect that would have on our health and nutrition. Just thought I should put that up. Now, on the hotels that waste food specifically, this is the reason. The reason is because there is no economic incentive to donate the food. Therefore, there is nothing we gain by donating the food. In fact, if we are to donate the food or pass the food to other people, there are costs that are involved in that. There might be fuel costs to transport it where it is needed, whether you want to, say, send it to orphanages or wherever, there would be costs involved in that. And the government of the day is not giving any kind of subsidy or any tax relief or anything from you distributing. So by the end of the day, because this is a business, we are motivated by profit. So if we donate the food or do whatever else with the food, we make losses as opposed to throwing it away. Throwing it away is much cheaper. So there is need for us to definitely work something around that. Once we work something around that, then there would be less food waste, because you can imagine we're throwing a lot of nice tasting food, delicious food, while people, you know, a few kilometers away are very hungry and cannot even access basic food, forget really good food. So I think that's something that we need to look at and address. Make it cheaper for people to be able to donate food, and perhaps give some incentives that would encourage that behavior. That would really help. On the farm waste, I'd also tell you the same. It is, again, much cheaper for us to throw away the food than it is for us to transport it or donate it to somewhere where it is needed. So those are factors that really contribute to food waste. So again, our policies, our attitudes and all that need to change so that we can actually save on our food. That's one. Now let me go to the second question. When it comes to the issue of rice and maize and all that. So currently, this country does not apparently grow enough of these things. We still import rice, of course, from our neighbors, apparently Tanzania, of course, and we also import rice from beyond the region. We still do that. We grow rice here, but then we also import rice because we do not have enough. In fact, our Mwea itself, for example, can only provide about half or a number close to that, just about half of the rice we need a year, 50 to 60% thereabout. So it doesn't provide us with enough. It is part of the reasons why the government has also put up a dam to ensure that we can have 2 planting seasons, 2 harvesting seasons, to just try and increase our production of rice. But even then, we still end up with a deficit that we will continue to import. We have the same problem with the maize. We do produce maize, we don't have enough, so we end up still having to import. To mention but a few food, products. So what my colleague mentioned specifically on encouraging younger people to get into farming, and us ensuring people understand it's agri-biz. It's not just agri, it's agri-biz. Because we all want to do business and make money, but we don't want to like do this work that looks like it's agriculture. So let's put it all together, agri-biz. We need to encourage more and more people to get into agriculture. We need to encourage, we need to have policies that again make it easy to get into agriculture and just cheaper as well to get into agriculture. I think these would all work towards ensuring food security and of course food sovereignty. I say food sovereignty because think of what happened when we had issues with Russia and Ukraine. We all suffered on the wheat products. Your favorite biscuits became more expensive. Chapatis became a bit rare in a number of households, except the households you mentioned that are except for those maybe. For most of you, it became and this is why we need to ensure we have food security and of course food sovereignty to the extent we're able to achieve that. Again, I'll discuss how there's so much to discuss in terms of how it would be cheaper or easier to get food from somewhere else where they have an advantage when it comes to production compared to us, comparative advantage and all. And we also have certain comparative advantages. So I'm not saying take out the international trade system or food or anything. No. I'm just saying we still need to really work on our systems to ensure that there is excellent food security.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on and sharing this amazing insight. I have so many questions, but I have to stop
and we
here.
have so many answers.
We even talk about the land
We
issue.
have so many
because the land tenure systems affects whether you'll produce your food.
Wow.
Because we haven't implemented our Community Land Act of 2016, which would have guaranteed and increase the access to land ownership by young people from our current 10% to around 40%. Because if you want to plant crops, you're not going to plant them in the air. And also, we haven't even talked about incentivizing, for example, the carbon markets to not just be about planting trees, but agroforestry. So instead of planting your mangroves, how about you plant coconuts? How about you plant palm trees? We haven't talked about it, but
there's so much to talk about when it comes to food security.
We'll definitely have another conversation,
Yes.
just a part 2 of this to extend. Where can people get you on your socials if for your company?
Yes, everything for us is on our website, policyactioninitiative.org. You can also find us on X, or formerly Twitter, before Musk brought it for a lot of money. At Policy Guild is our Twitter handle. You can also find us on Instagram. At Policy Action Initiative is our Instagram handle.
All right.
Connect with us. We always have a team that will answer your questions. If you also need support on policy brief writing, if you also need support on research data collection, we are there to assist you. And also, if you need capacity building assistance, because the past weekend we trained a group from Lesotho on environmental advocacy. If you need assistance in that side, we are willing to provide it, as always.
All right. Awesome.
From anywhere in the world.
Thanks
to technology, we can do that
know?
now. Yes.
There's a lot. Thank you so much. This has been Elijah Bakari, Head of Research, and Brian Kithinji, the Executive Director at Policy Action Initiative. And we've been talking about eliminating zero hunger. That's SDG number 2. This is a conversation that we'll be definitely continuing with sometime later. We'll tell you when. Thank you for staying with us throughout the show all the way till past 10 a.m. We really appreciate you. I wish you a very great day ahead. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. My name is Stephanie Ayeta.
Y254. Imagine.